Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Very excited. We got Tanya returning and first time new face Tamara Holmes coming in here. Very excited. We're going to get intros in a second. Now, while I'm excited, y'all should be too. Make sure you like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all of that good stuff so you get your emails in the morning whenever we go live, which is, of course, every day. Now, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, by all means, put it up in the comment section. We will engage them directly, kind of like this one. Winterstorm, good morning, team. Good to see you, buddy. He's in early. I like it. Now, today, we're going to be getting into inspiration. We're going to be inspiring people all week. I'm very excited about this topic because, well, Shaun and I just figured it out yesterday, but we're going to hit it and we're going to hit it hard like we normally do. But let's get some intros. So right off the bat, Tanya, it's been a little while, so I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to come to you, Tamara, and then we will go from there. So Tanya, give me a quick 10 to 15 second. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff. Hit it.
I'm based out of Montreal and I'm a visual artist. Boom, done.
Bam! Under 5 seconds. Look at that.
What the heck? Is that like a record?
I think it is. The points for brevity, though. So good job, Tamara. How about yourself?
I am a firefighter, currently a captain, open fire in California, and a baseball coach for USA Baseball and some minor league baseball camps.
Bam! Nice and tight. I like it. That's awesome. So today we are going to be getting into inspiration, which it's going to be an interesting. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation because there's lots to it. But here's a quick definition from the dictionary. Inspiration is an inspiring agent or influence, the quality or state of being inspired, the act of drawing in. And another one is a divine influence or action on a person believed to qualify him or her to receive and communicate sacred revelation. Which I think is just a great,
What is even
just
going
great,
on?
right?
You write
Just a
that
great
down.
start. So that's a quick definition, but let's go around the table and see what your guys' first thoughts are on it. Tanya, when I first talk about inspiration, what are your first thoughts?
Well, when you first talk about inspiration, my first thoughts are more to do with visual art for obvious experiences or for obvious reasons. And I'm yeah, that's it. It's when I think of inspiration, I think of art and the notion of the notion of how pros don't wait for inspiration. But in regards to this context, I think about it also based on art, where I guess it's the study of semiotics, where it's the symbol, signifier, so on and so forth, and how symbols and other inspiring things are often a very flattened view of the complexity of a person, and it's that tug of war between reality and symbol that's interesting to me. So those would be my initial thoughts.
I like it. Tamara, what about your first thoughts?
I kind of like where Tanya talked about like the visual representation um, of inspiration, right? Like no matter where you are in age and level of ability, I feel like inspiration starts based on what people see. And similar, like you said, professional athletes or people oftentimes don't know that you're an inspiration, or you just are because of the fact that you're out there and that you're visible. And if you ask a lot of athletes, right, it's not necessarily something we seek, but it's something that we know is as part of our responsibility. It starts with a visual thing, and depending on who you are, where you are, you can be inspired. You can inspire others just based on what you do. It's funny because people say that a lot for us in women's baseball, which is not visible hardly at all. They're like, "Hey, what's it like being this inspiration for the next generation?" And you learn to say all the right things, but to be honest, is like you're on an island, and I'm out there for myself, right? I'm out there for playing for t-shirts, right? Like there's no league, there's no this or that. I'm out there having fun, doing the best that I can do, and if that happens to inspire others, that's great. But a lot of times we'll say like, "Oh, I'm here for the next generation." No, I'm here first for myself. but understanding that there may be some others watching me and that I have some responsibility in how I present myself for that inspiration.
Interesting, Shaun. What are your first thoughts?
Well, I didn't have any. I always rely on the guest to kind of kick off my thought process. So I'm just kind of going to go in theme with what both of the ladies said and play around with it a little bit. So to Tanya's opening statements, I kind of like what she was saying in respect to the artistry of the world and how we can view things sometimes two-dimensionally, but it's our responsibility to see things three-dimensionally. And all my life, I've looked at the world through patterns. I'm a guy who forms patterns. Sometimes I don't have to observe something very long to form the pattern. Sometimes I've got to observe for a long time to form the patterns. But I run my life off of patterns. It takes sometimes deep contemplative observation, and sometimes I can get it in a flash. In a split second, I can form the pattern. But my life is formed on patterns. And it makes my life simple. By creating the patterns, I can then offload the pattern because I now understand how that works or how that works. And so to Tanya's point, through that viewing the world through a patternized reality, I suppose, it has made me look at the world a little bit differently than maybe most, or than some for sure. And so I like to capture art the way I like to capture art. I like to see things the way I like to see things. And now that plays into what Tamara's point was. I'm kind of out here doing me. And I mean, I put up a photo in my stories, my Instagram stories, just about 15 minutes ago. I'm standing next to my lovely wife here in Penang, Malaysia. We had a nice dinner, and I'm wearing Birkenstocks and white socks. I mean, who does that but German tourists? I mean, it's a ridiculous look that I had, but I don't care because I'm doing me. And I'm sure I'll get some teasing from the Brohimos back in the day, but it doesn't bother me. I'm confident enough to rock white socks and Birkenstocks. But I guess where I find myself now, and now again to Tamara's point, is this whole inspiration thing, or being inspiring, is a really new phenomenon to me. I'm just kind of doing me. And some people think it's cool, and some people probably think I'm a goof. But I'm starting to realize now, as Tamara stated, that there is kind of a responsibility to people who are kind of tracking my little gong show. And sometimes I struggle to, I always remain authentic, but I struggle to also sometimes go out the door and think, oh boy, like people are kind of tracking what I'm doing, and I've got to be careful sometimes on the trajectory that I move in, because I don't want to lead anyone astray, as it were. Now that might sound weird, but as a semi-inspiring person, I find myself watching my P's and Q's a little more closely now than I did years ago, when literally I was just hanging out in the shadows and nobody really knew me. So I'm curious to see where this conversation goes, because I'll probably be looking to the ladies to chuck some wisdom my way on how to maybe not run my life better, but better understand this inspiration trajectory that I'm just starting to kind of find myself on by happenstance, as it were.
I really like that. Now, let's dig into it a little bit. Tamara, you got any thoughts on anything that Shaun just went over?
Probably just speaking to the responsibility of it, right? It's one thing when you may be similar to women's baseball, right? You're doing things in relative obscurity, but now we have this platform, or I'm putting myself out there on media, right? So yes, it's I'm being me and I'm doing me, but I'm also putting this out there for some reason. So yes, if you kind of look at my Instagram, right, I try to be authentic to who I am, which is literally all over the place. And then I also have to realize, as I teach these youth camps from young girls and sometimes boys, anywhere from 8 to 30s or adults, like I have to be somewhat conscious of what I put out there, right? Bad language, just crazy things. Like I think the more internal person I am is a bit wild and out there, but If I'm coaching these kids per se, and I'm allowing them to follow me on these pages, now, yes, then you can separate maybe my coaching from whatever. I just haven't done that yet. But I do try to be as a good person and mindful of who that audience may be and who you want that audience to be. If I want my audience to be, who I don't care, or wild or crazy, or you can say, this is who I am, take it or leave it. There is a responsibility to that yes, I can do that, but maybe my employer doesn't like that. Right. So if I'm just working solely for myself, that's one thing. But if I go out there and I'm wearing my, fire stuff, or I'm representing USA, and in USA baseball, we're very big on that representation and being proud of representing the country. So like that's always on the back end. And unless I'm going to separate who I am, if that's any different, it's really not that much different. But if I'm going to separate that, then I should. If not, I have to be present with what I put out there.
Absolutely. Tanya, thoughts?
I guess I gained some. People gained awareness as to who I was on Instagram through my MMA photography, and photographers often like being on the other side of the camera, and we like. I imagine it will resonate with Shaun in the sense that we stick to the peripheral, stay out of the way, stay as unseen as possible, and just observe, observe, observe. And it is weird and uncomfortable when people recognize me when I visit other gyms. And I can't imagine what the fighters at the gym who are extremely, well known, what they must go through, because it is a weird feeling, and it's like that mantle of responsibility is just, it's very heavy, and it suddenly lands on me, so to speak. The realization of what I am representing, which is my gym and my coach, and how I have to conduct myself, is made extremely obvious to me, and it's uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with it, and even just being on this side of the lens and having my thoughts and actions and words be seen by others and possibly influence them, it is a very heady kind of experience. So that would that's I think the extent of what I have to add to that.
Interesting. Now, we have a quick little jump in here. Matt jumped on, said, morning team, hope you all have an epic day. Good to see you, Matt. He was just on yesterday, but he's watching today. I like this. I like it. He's in the game. Now, I have a question for you guys in terms of, earlier you guys were talking about symbolism, and I was wondering how mindful you are on a daily basis in terms of the symbolism that you're projecting, I guess. And projecting is not a great word for it, but when we're talking about social media, we're talking about being in the public eye. I guess I'm drawing a line between like influencers versus inspirers, like the people that are doing things in order to better the world, and there's people that are out there to better themselves, at least in my mind. And I'm wondering if there is a division there where people are actually mindful of what they're representing versus not being mindful of what they're representing at all. Shaun, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm in the thick of it right now. If I just take the last 24 hours of walking around Georgetown here in Penang, Malaysia, there's a lot of, I would say, millennials that are all over themselves in front of the mirror. They're preening, constantly adjusting things. A photo it's almost like a TikTok dance photo. And so it's all the poses in 10 seconds or less. I mean, I watched a couple of girls in front of a wall do about 1,000 poses in about 4 seconds. And it was so contrived. It was so inauthentic. It was so artificial. And, I'm not like saying that sucks, but that's just not how I run my life. And so there is to me, a marked difference between an authentic life and a contrived life. And I just don't contrive myself. I mean, look at the shaggy DA hair on me right now. It's ridiculous. I don't know the last time I combed it. It's combed with a towel on the regular basis. And so I'm not too fussy about my form. What I am concerned with is my function. And so how I've lived my life is function based, not form based. I have very poor sense of style. And fortunately, my wife probably gets a grip on me a little bit, but I mean, I'm a handful. And so I think that there's a wild difference in my mind, or from my perception, my visual recognition of the landscape around me, between an influencer and an inspirer. And I truly believe the difference is the inauthenticity or inauthentic moment, the contrived moment. And I think to some people, it's obvious depending on the environment. So again, I'm going to talk about where I'm at right now in Georgetown. There's a lot of tourists that move through this area. And so if everyone's flaring out and everyone's doing 1,000 poses in 4 seconds, it then becomes the norm. And so if the norm is contrived, depending on where you live, then what is an influencer and what is an inspirer? I don't know. But in my world, I think maybe I live a simpler life. Maybe, I don't know. But I can clearly see the distinction between an influencer and an inspirer.
Tamara, what are you thinking?
I think Shaun is spot on that. Uh, Kind of prior to what Tanya was saying, I wanted to ask her, when she's representing the MMA, it seemed like you said you had this big responsibility, but in my mind, like, that would be a less sterile environment where you could be a little bit more raw, right? So in baseball and all these other things that I do, they are very different, right? And I'm a Gemini, I can be a chameleon, right? USA baseball is way more sterile, right? It's like golf, right? Old school golf, right? It's very clean, it's very this, very for our country, and all that is great, right? The representation. Then who I am as a firefighter is going to be, I wouldn't say a 180 of that, but right, I'm going to be a lot more raw. We're kind of down and dirty, kind of layman's people, oftentimes foul mouth. So those things are going to be different. And so you're right. Like, I don't have a product or any one thing that I am to be an influencer. I like to dabble in many things, and that's probably most of what you'll reflect on my Instagram, right? You may see baseball, you may see fire, you may see my welding, you may see Olympic weightlifting, all these things. So the influencer, I believe Shaun is right. It is so contrived and so sterile that, like, I've got all the perfect filters, I got the perfect thing, and it's just not right. Like, for me on my IG, I'll wear those white socks with those Birkenstocks. I grew up in Berkeley. I can do that, right? So you're going to see that, like, a very poorly dressed parent in one end, and then it's just craziness. So I take that role more of I'm probably inspiring others as a 50-year-old still playing baseball, still doing these things. I want you to see, like, this is who I am, and this is what you can do at this age, right? That's probably the best that I have to give as I go out there and coach and do these things and show who I am. It's like, just don't stop, try all things, do many things, fail at a lot of things, but definitely not an influencer, because that now is led to something different with followers and all these things that you have to put out there and content, and really probably not be that much of yourself.
Yeah, Tanya, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, there's so many, I guess, poignant things that both Shaun and Tamara said. I guess my first thought is, yeah, I can definitely be more myself in regards to the MMA photography. I think there is always a baseline in representing the gym and my coach, and also the level of jujitsu that I put forth. Because when I'm there, I'm sparring, and I think there's a certain level of quality that they expect, and I don't know if I achieve it, but I do my best. And I guess my thoughts were the delineation between influencers and inspiration or inspirers is, I feel that inspirers are saying this is who I am, whereas influencers are saying I am selling you who you want to be, because there's very little about influencers' lives that are truly theirs. There are many exceptions, but most of them, they rent the fancy cars. They don't own, a private jet. They rent it for 40 minutes to take their photos, and that's it. Whereas inspirers they do their thing. And that leads me to my other thought. It is that inspiration is almost in the eye or the mind of the beholder, is it not? Because I imagine none of you go out there and say, this thing that I'm going to do is going to be inspiring. You just put something out there and hope that it resonates with someone, but you can't plant that seed in their mind, so to speak. Can't forcibly do it. It's the individual that sees you do, say, be something, and then a light switch, a light bulb goes off in their head. So I suppose that would be my other thought. And then my question is that we will, I guess rip on influencers for being overly contrived and mindful, but where is that line between mindful and contrived? Because there's a way of putting yourself together especially when you're representing, say, a team in any aspect, and how that world sees you. Obviously, special forces, I think their wardrobe's a little more eclectic, but uniforms in general the leaders want you to look on point because you are representing something. And if you look disheveled, then you likely are disheveled, and then you're also assigning that to the entity, right? So I'm very curious for you guys, how do you make that difference between mindful and overly curated and everything being contrived?
You took the question out of my mouth there, Tanya. Thank you very much. I was actually what I was going to get into was there's preening for attention, right? And my thoughts went to the bird of paradise down in the Amazon, right, with the colorful feathers and the dancing around and all that stuff. And it made me think about the fact that they have to do that because they live in a colorful world. And so I think a lot of this, in terms of inspirers versus influencers, things like that, I think a lot of influencers see the world through this colored lens of like, look at how flashy everything is, so now I have to be flashy as well. And to that line of bird of paradise kind of style, where you have to stand out by being that much more flashy. And on the flip side, you have the formalized sterility within, say, the military context, stuff like that. We talked about it on Remembrance Day, in terms of, if you're going to represent, you have to be able to represent cleanly as to the ideal of what it is you're looking for, in terms of that formalized sterility, in terms of every uniform is exactly the same and it's all done correctly to represent. So you're right in line of what I was going to ask anyway. I do appreciate it. Let's go to Tamara. What do you think? Any thoughts on that at all?
I think, like Tanya said, if I'm selling a product or an idea, sometimes we look at these things and I'm like, who believes in that, right? But there clearly is an audience for it. So like we have one of our members who's a firefighter, and he is really deep in the influencer world, and he would have he drives a Ferrari, right? No one really in the fire department would drive a Ferrari, and he goes to concerts and he's got pictures with Taylor Swift, but he's living his authentic life. He's not trying to sell or anything, but those are the crowds that he likes. So like there is a very real aspect of that. And you're right, for if you were trying to sell a product or do something, like clearly that's making money and clearly that's an audience. So it's just kind of the way of the world for that. But for the rest of us, if there isn't a product that you're trying to sell, or if you're not trying to build a gathering for any one reason, whether it's, hey, this is what I believe in, come join me, or if I'm trying to monetize that, then me just being myself, hopefully that inspires others. If not, it's literally, hey, this is what I'm just trying to share. I think that I have years of experience in particular things, and I too am just trying to figure out the best way to put that out. And right now it's either through camps and different leadership things, but mainly it's like, this is my life and this is the ride, and I want to share these things with you.
I like that, Shaun. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's the same for me, man. I mean, like, I'm just going to tell a couple of different stories here. So, you know, Tanya had said something, and she'd used the term or the word hope. You know, you do your thing and you hope that someone ... I don't actually hope. Like, I'm just doing me. And I don't, if someone digs on it, cool. If someone doesn't dig on it, cool. That doesn't bother me either way. What I am trying to do is do me. And if it inspires someone to do better, now I'm stoked. But I'm not trying to make people better. I'm just trying to have them pick up what we're putting down authentically. And if they're not into it, move along. And if they're into it, stick around. So I don't hope anything other than I hope it gets bigger, but I'm not hoping anything that I do does that. I'm just going to do me, which makes it super easy for me nowadays. So I'm now going to use my disheveled self. I mean, sometimes my buddies jack me up for not shaving before the podcast. Like, we'll have some large and in charge guests, and I'll come in like a rag doll, like I'm a mess. But like, you either like me or you like my fresh haircut. Well, you better like me, because I'm not going to have a fresh haircut. Sometimes I'm a hot mess, and I'm not trying to represent something that I'm not. So I think that if someone wants to influence someone and has to put on a mask or has to put on a disguise to do it, I'm not cool with it. And that's different than how Tamara was describing her role within high-level baseball, where she's representing a team, but still by being her authentic self, but just maybe cleaning things up a little bit. The only team that I'm on right now is the collective. Otherwise, I'm not responsible to anyone. I don't need to sell a t-shirt. I don't need to sell a poster. I'm just doing me. Now, I'll clean up from time to time, but I'm not going to be fake-a-roni. That's it. That's all. For me to continue doing what I'm doing, I have to be me to keep doing it. Otherwise, I'll bounce, because then I'll feel contrived. So everyone is kind of used to my nonsense by now, that I might come in with a mop of a head and unshaven, but I'll do my best as a human being rather than as a tight haircut. So that would be my first thought on that. Now, the second thing in respect to clearly delineating between influencer and inspirer, I didn't know Tamara's backstory. I didn't know that she was 50. I didn't know that she was multifaceted. And so at 60, and I consider myself multifaceted as well, I considered that to be inspiring. I consider her to be inspiring, because I feel that you have to have a certain amount of three-dimensionality within you or within your life trajectory in order to be inspiring. Because if you don't have dimensionality, if you only have one dimension to your life, and typically it's young people flaring out 1,000 photos in 4 seconds, it's because they don't have the depth of experience. They don't have the lifetimes full of wisdom and failures and understanding that it's not about how you flick your jacket over your shoulder in 97 different angles to get a variety of photos until all the filters are applied, and then you push yourself out to the internet as something that you're not. I think it's cool that Tamara can be who she is based on how many lives she's lived within a single life. That is called confidence. That is called believing in yourself. when I put my story up on Instagram with my white socks and Birkenstocks, and my wife looks great. And it's not that she's a style maven. It's not that we dress up a lot, but I went down to just to have a bowl of laksa soup here in our hotel, and I look like a scrub most of the time. I do right now. I'm in no-gi shorts, my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu t-shirt, and a mop of a head. And she came downstairs and round the corner. I was like, whoa, you look nice. And way, like 1,000 times nicer than I do. And like, if I wasn't confident in who I am, I'd be embarrassed. I should be embarrassed, but I'm not, because I'm comfortable in my own skin. And so maybe for me, it comes down to this, that if you've lived a rich enough tapestry of life, then it's less about the tapestry that you wear for the world. It's who you are inside, and if you're confident with who you are. So that's where I would leave it, is you either are it or you fake it.
That's an interesting thought, Tanya. What are you coming on this?
I tend to think fairly laterally, so let me know if these are too out of left field. See, I also know baseball things. I don't. So in regards to if you are it, what's interesting is that people will say Steve Jobs as an example and his black turtleneck and jeans outfit, and they will essentially copy him because they think that they will become as successful as he is. But they don't often look at the reasoning as to why he used to wear the turtlenecks. It's because I believe it was to reduce the cognitive load. So he doesn't have to make that decision. That's one less little decision that he has to make, because he has to make a lot of big ones. And I guess that leads into my other point, is that people will look at it's the visuals, right? We are visual creatures, and they will see the first impressions of what you're doing. And I'm wondering, how do you go about, if your goal is to impart messages of, say, self-betterment and personal development to people, how do you go about holding people's attention long enough to look past the surface of the wrapping and get to the good stuff underneath? Because while to some it isn't their primary focus, they're just going to do them, right? And if you like it, great. But I think for me, or many at least, there's also that maybe perhaps lack of confidence, but there is a desire to get more eyes on something that a message that you're putting out in the world, especially if you want to make the world a better place. And it's that monster that is marketing, right? How do you work? How do you navigate that?
That is a great question, Tamara. I'm coming to you. What do you think?
With the wrapping, Tanya said, and Shaun, as he, describes himself in his dress, you're clearly not selling clothes. You're clearly not selling style, right? You're bringing the collective together to share a story. So we can look at you and look past that, and I don't see any problem with it, right? Like, I see this authentic person. I don't see a mess. And luckily, from this side of the camera, I can't smell you if you smell bad, if you haven't showered or anything. But it's all about who we are, and for the collective, right? Like, you want people, if you want this as a job, or you want this to thrive, or maybe you don't need money, right? There's like some aspect of give and take of how we bring people in to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. So I start with the skill. I start with like, hey, have you seen me play? You see me play. Okay, now the advice that I'm giving, is it on par with someone that has the professional aptitude in what you're giving? Sure. People are going to seek us for either that. You either tell a great story, or you have a great product, or I'm watching your movements and doing things and want to emulate. And maybe it starts with like the Steve Jobs. I'm going to start dressing like him first, and then I'm going to figure out those other things. Like I said, minimize the distractions. But once you figure that out, Shaun, I don't know if it's because we got into a certain age or whatever, but it is highly liberating once you can be yourself finally. And I wish I had the ability to find that maybe in my late 20s or my 30s, but it literally came, like you said, with I've lived and done so many of these things. And for so long, I've sought, especially in this world, like prior, like we adopted 3 kids in 3 years, and they're now 5, 4, and 3 years old. I was struggling. I'd done all these things, played professional baseball. I'm a professional firefighter, and I would wake up in like a panic of like, man, my life does not feel full. I'm missing something. And kids help that to a certain degree, but that I went down this path of all the self-read books of leadership, of um, trying to better yourself, and just I can't even think of all the authors. I was searching and searching and searching, and finally I feel like I've kind of found that, in that just be yourself and give where you want to, and don't be afraid to fail. So I'd read all the books, but I had zero action. So I think once I started kind of putting things in action and trying things and just really living life and all these experiences, you're right, I got to a point where I could care a whole lot less, and that's amazing. And if I could, put that out for anyone out there, the sooner that you realize where you can be yourself and share these things and do whatever, and get that earlier in life, you're going to have a much more productive life as you get older, right? It's best if it doesn't have to come at 40 and 50 years old, but if you keep plugging at it, it will come.
Absolutely. Shaun, thoughts?
Yay. That was so good. That's so great. I think the thing that is tickling away at the back of my brain right now is, and this is pure coincidence. I mean, honestly, this is not a contrived moment. I had no idea that Tanya was going to be on the show today. I had, like, Chance knows, like, I know nothing. I show up. I don't know what we're going to talk about. I barely know who the guest is going to be. I've known Tamara for about, I don't know, 12 hours or less by IG. And so I didn't know Tanya was coming on today. And it is pure coincidence that today I put up a photo that Tanya took about 2 years ago when I was recording a 7-day long audiobook with the Slavinator with Seb Lavoie. And so I didn't know what photo I was going to use for the thing that was inside of me that I just wanted to get out. Some verbiage that talked about how if we're all just drops of water as human beings, then there's a path of least resistance, which is a meandering stream moving through a forest effortlessly and moving its way around the obstacles. And then there's a path of most resistance, which is a waterfall crashing into obstacles in front of it, eventually wearing them down and creating new canyons. And I stated that in order to understand the flow of life, you have to experience both extremes to truly understand how to flow through life. And if you're a one-dimensional influencer, you're not flowing, you're faking. And so I've crashed into things and I've flowed around things enough that I feel like I know myself and how I need to move through the world. The world unfolds in front of me nowadays. I don't work too hard at it nowadays. I just accept what is in front of me and I either crash through it or I flow through it. Sometimes I'm loud and sometimes I'm operating in the shadows silently, and I don't have to think about it too much. My life now unfolds, not carelessly and not carefully, but organically. And I know that's a hard thing to understand if you're 20 years old, because when I was 20, I didn't understand it. And I barely understood it at 50, but I've got a freaking grip on it now at 60. And I truly believe that I understand how to flow through life effortlessly. It doesn't mean that it's easy, but it is effortlessly for me because it just unfolds. Now, the coincidental part is the photo that I chose was the one that Tanya took, because to me, what it represents is a dude who was a tier 1 operator, and then many years later, now I'm a freaking podcaster, and who knew? The life is a trip if you let it unfold in front of you. And so I'd said to my wife this morning, we were going to go out, we just had breakfast and we're about for a saunter around here in Little India in Penang. And she said, well, are you ready to go? And I looked at her and I said, no, I just need half an hour. I need half an hour to myself. I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to throw on my headphones. I'm going to chillax, listen to some tunes, and figure out what I got to get out on paper. I am compelled to get something out today. And it had been bubbling up in me for a couple of days. And it was about flow through life, and how we are single drops of water that, when combined, can turn into a stream or can turn into a waterfall, or can be a puddle that is stagnant. And so I had these ideas, in not just in my head, but a feeling within inside of me that I had to get out. I don't consider myself a creator, but I'm curious and I have a creative side. And when I let my creation unfold in front of me, it unfolded into words on digital paper. And I needed an image to represent what I felt inside of me that I had to get out. Not to get out to the world, but get out of me. And I don't know why, but I'm not going to argue with myself. I'm not going to fight myself on this issue. If I feel like I've got to do something, then I do it nowadays. And my poor wife sometimes has to put up with my nonsense. She didn't know why I had to get this out. She didn't know why I was upstairs with noise canceling headphones doing what I was doing. I didn't even know. But I just followed my gut, followed my instinct, let it unfold in front of me, and it turned into, I think, some decent-ish writing with an amazing photo put out by a creative who unfolded that moment for me in a way. And so if Tanya is a drop and I'm a drop, well, her photo is the result. And Tamara, the things that she said today, is another drop in my life, a drop of wisdom, a drop of new understanding. I will unfold differently tomorrow because of the things that have been said in this conversation. And so, tomorrow, will I contrive a post? No, it's just not what I do. But if anyone picks up what I was putting down in the post this morning and they are inspired by it, well, freaking awesome. But I didn't, as I was typing it, I didn't hope that I was going to change anyone's life. If someone changes their life a tiny bit because of it, well, rock on. And if not, cool. No biggie. So, my point would be this, that if you, as Tamara said, if you can just believe enough in yourself that your authentic self is good enough for the world to make the world a better place, well, freaking get after it.
Bam.
That
Just
was beautiful.
Yeah. Well said. Now, I'm going to play off this a little bit because I really like where you're going with this. Satch jumped in here and he said, "Good morning, team. Good to see you." And then he asked this, "Can you fake it until you make it?" And I have a postulation that I want to put towards you guys, and then we can discuss it. Is that earlier we were talking about preening and the influencers versus inspirers and these things, but do you think that perhaps it is more about the depth of understanding of anything? So, for instance, one of the examples used earlier, Shaun, was the flick of the jacket over the shoulder. They're like, "Yeah." What does that actually mean? What does it represent? Right? What is, for anybody that has some depth of knowledge, that has some depth of experience, that has lived a life kind of around and experienced a lot of different things, they can see that jacket toss as a moment of relaxation. They develop the thought of, what is actually happening there, right? Is he just flicking the jacket over the shoulder because it's taut and he wants to toss his shoulder? Looks cool. Versus somebody who is trying to get the right look. Didn't quite reach over the shoulder. Oh, it hung over the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a depth, and then there's a superficiality of the exact same instance. And so I'm wondering, do you think that is is kind of a marker based on, and it goes into the, fake it till you make it. Can you toss your jacket over your shoulder up until the point that you have an understanding of why that person tossed the jacket over the shoulder, if that makes any sense? Tanya, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
I would say yes and no. Sometimes there are lessons that, say, a certain scruffy former Tier 1's operator has taught me that may not be apparent. You need to, like, just do it. And I'm like, got it. Do it. I don't know why I'm doing it. And eventually, years down the line, I'm like, oh, okay, he might know what he's talking about this and that. And so in that case, there might be a point where you reach it, but I think it might be contingent on the fact that you have to. Actually, I don't know. Maybe, I mean, we have two masters of many crafts here. Is it a chicken or egg thing? Do you repeat something long enough and then you can see the subtleties in it, or actually, let me rephrase. If you repeat something long enough, do you develop the discernment and the sensitivity to see the subtleties in it? Or do you have to have the discernment or the ability to discern to become masterful at anything?
Tamara, what do you think?
I think that was great what Tanya said. But if you think of, I guess it depends on the industry. When you think of sport, right? Like a couple of things come to mind. Greg Everett would talk about Olympic weightlifting, and some people would have a natural bend in their arm at some point of the lift. And so people would copy that. And he would go to point out, it's like, this happens, if it happens naturally as a result of doing something, it's not going to hinder you as much as like, oh, I've seen Greg do it, so I'm going to now bend, and now I'm doing all this stuff out of sequence, and I'm not lifting all that great. With style, yes. I'm sorry, I'm like super distracted by the fact that I dipped this in coffee this morning. But with with style, you can, right? If someone's flipping the jacket or doing whatever, all I'm looking at is like, hey, that's a great jacket. I may want to go buy that, right? But with sport and anything else, when we emulate, we have to be careful what we emulate, and then yes, find that understanding behind it. We see that a lot in baseball with hitting. As kids, we all had our favorite style that we would copy, but that may not suit me. If like, it may look cool for me to have my hands really high and do all these things, but then I'm late to the ball, and I may not figure that out because I wanted to be like Ken Griffey, lefty back in the day. But he was very upright. But I learned for myself, I loved how really tall upright players looked. But anytime I did that, I was late. I had to be slightly into my legs and a little bit more squatty. So style, yes, maybe you can emulate. But when it comes to certain professional activities, whether it be sport, metalworking, woodworking, those are things that you can't trade. People, the other journey I've kind of been going on is day trading futures. So you can follow the people that say, hey, look at my Lambo, and I made $1 million just using this one technique. And then we find out, actually, right, the people that I needed to follow aren't flashy. They're doing the work, and they're teaching you how to fish. They're not trying to get you stuck on just following them in any one thing. So follow the people that are going to teach you how to fish, how to grow, so that you can be self-sufficient. They don't want to need you forever.
I really like that. Shaun, thoughts?
For sure. I think that the answer is already being provided by Tanya within her question. The word is time. The aspect of time. Nothing can be accomplished in a split second, unless you're a sprinter, perhaps. But life isn't a sprint. And I know it's cliche, life is a marathon. It's kind of goofy, but it's kind of true. I've said it several times in the past that, pick something. What do you want to be? Then put 10 years into it. Then come and talk to me, and I'll be impressed. So 10-year timeline will let you know what you're good at or not. So time is what sorts everything out. So fake it till you make it, I think is a quaint saying that I actually don't believe in. What I do believe in is start doing you, as Tamara just said. You can be influenced with certain styles that you can try and see if that works for you. But that is the key to it, if it works for you. I think that what tends to happen nowadays is someone will see someone who's having success, we'll call it whatever that means nowadays, and they'll latch onto that trajectory as if they were successful, that's going to make me successful by tomorrow. And that simply isn't the case. What you have to do is take time observing all the various people who are doing all the various things in a variety of different ways and organically find what works for you. As Tamara said, she had to squat down a little bit and adjust her posture and start finding out what worked well for her. And then, once she started figuring that out, probably had to throw a boatload more years into it until she started to see outcomes that she was not only comfortable with, but she was pleased with, that made the journey worthwhile. To me, anything free is worthless. Anything that I can get by tomorrow doesn't have value. All of my life, the things that I feel have made me a better person have taken time. Not a week, not a month, not a year, but a decade or more. I've done several things for several decades, and I still continue to do them. And every year that goes by, I learn more about it and me and the connection between those two things. I just don't think anything that you can get within a day has value as a human being. So, to the influencer aspect, if someone could jump on Amazon today and buy fame, they'd be putting their credit card down. And it's indicative of the mindset that is artificial. It's an artificial construct for perhaps success. I'm not sure if success is the right word, but to me, looking back over the decades, it's easy to contextualize what success means to me. When I was 20, I might have had a different definition, but now I clearly understand how I wasn't doing it as well as I could have. And now I try to do it better than I ever did. Time will sort things out.
I really like where you guys are all going with this, and I've been thinking about this. Tamara, I think you brought up fishing a second ago, and I wanted to work that out a little bit, because you hear a lot about in hunting, in fishing, in I think pretty much in every discipline, with hunters, we'll talk to each other and be like, what's the best cartridge? What's the best rifle? What's the best camouflage? What's the all these things, right? Which are all superficial pieces to the actual concept of hunting. But you get to that point through, as Shaun said, time. You have to spend time in the field. You got to try these different cartridges. You have to try these different camouflages. But at the end of the day, the best hunters that I ever met roamed around in plaid and jeans, right? And I didn't care what rifle they had, because it was more about finding the right position, getting the right wind, doing all the little things that hunting require. Same thing with fishing. You'd see, say, an older person fishing with a particular rod and a particular lure and a particular set and all these things, and you see a young person show up, and all they see is the rod and the lure and the pieces that put all those things together. To your point, Tamara, about stance. I see this in jiu-jitsu all the time, where you have newer white belts show up and they're like, oh, I saw this move on Instagram and I want to be able to use it. But there's no depth of understanding into why you would use it, where that actually plays into it. Is it part of your game? Would it play into your style, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as you guys are saying. And so I really like where you guys are going with this, and I wanted to just maybe talk about it a little bit more, maybe grow it out a little bit more in terms of, there is time, yes, and then you have to have the experience, but that you also have to take the time to develop what it is works for you, because my jiu-jitsu game is different than other people's jiu-jitsu game, just based on my physical stature. I'm tall and I'm lanky, right? My game is not the same as someone who's 5'2" and 180 pounds, or even Tanya. Absolutely. So I'm wondering how do we impart that knowledge, and more than what we're doing right now, but also I want to know what it is that you guys look for when you say seek inspiration. Let's say when you're looking at somebody else and you're like, wow, look at that person, they're awesome. What is it that is intriguing to you, that inspires you? I guess, Tanya, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
So for me, what I look for, actually, first thing, in terms of the fishing rod and so on, I think that ties back to my original statement of the semiotics, where people will imbue this object with all of the traits that they want. So, say a super cool rifle or a super snazzy baseball bat, they're like, that's where they get their skill. Like, this is the representation, because that's where the action happens, so to speak. But they obviously don't look at the tens of thousands of hours that people have put into their craft. So that would be the first point. And then in regards to inspiration, or what I look at that's inspiring, I guess that changes as I age, but how I determine if someone's masterful at their craft in terms of physical activities, I think that can be applied to how I do it in life. It's not the flashy. It's not the striker throwing the, fancy punches. It's not the, it's not the baseball player or the Olympic lifter making those crazy actions. I look at the feet, if that makes sense. The feet and the positioning. Footwork is usually how I determine how skilled someone is. If they know how to be in the right time at the right place, and in the case of combat sports, get their opponent in the wrong time at the wrong place at the right time, that's how I discern masters. And I imagine I look at that, I apply that to the rest of my life. People might look at Shaun and see, oh, maybe I gotta wear a jujitsu thing and never shave and never brush my hair, and that's how I'm gonna get there. But they don't look at the moments when in between, so to speak. They don't look at his feet, so to speak. They don't look at how he observes things, and he spends more time listening than he does talking. They don't see how he chooses his words carefully and waits for exactly the right moment to say what he feels is the right thing. So for me, that's how I go about looking for inspiration, is I look at the things that most people don't look at. And to put it shortly, I look at the footwork, so to speak.
I love that. I'm gonna quote you on that. Tanya finds inspiration in other people's feet.
No, there's already a weird running joke that I have a weird foot fetish, so please don't. I don't. This is gonna make it worse.
No worries. Tamara, any thoughts?
I love that. We are at an age and at a level where we can see certain nuances like that and see that poetry in motion. Like similar to Tanya, I can look at how someone rides a bike and tell you how athletic they are, right? In Olympic lifting, I can watch somebody and I can hear a certain rattle of the barbell and tell if you did that right. Or even, with the crack of a bat a certain way. I know, and the feeling you get. But for the 20-year-old, if you were to tell the 20-year-old me, hey, 10 years, right? Like if you've all read Outliers, and like that will sound like a lifetime, and you're going to lose them, right? You're going to lose all young people in that. What we have to impart is like Shaun said, just start with something you love and go all in. Go to the process, to the practice, to the research, all these things that we never had before, because all you have at a young age is emulation, right? Like to copy someone at first and then hopefully find a coach or a mentor that can help you fine tune those things. But we're at an age where we can see just on movement, right? Like I knew when I first started teaching CrossFit, I could I understood movement. I knew there was something about me that understood through all my athletics and everything, but I was missing the technical aspect of wording. So I would kind of regurgitate what our owner at the time, Mike Minium, would say, because he had all the the professional skill set, and he was a very intelligent guy. From there, right, I could only just kind of regurgitate the basics, but I couldn't break down a process of errors or how to correct. So then I started taking a ton of classes, a ton of things, and it all go back to that experience. It was time. I would always wonder, like, man, when am I going to get there to where I could see these things? And yeah, it took like 5-10 years later or whatever it is. I mean, you improved every year, but if I were to just focus on how much time that it really was going to take, you would have lost me. And when I adopted kids, my gym owner, she was like, I don't know if you know this, but your life is going to have to change. It'll be 5 years before you. I was like, 5 years, man, you've lost your fucking mind. Like, these kids are going to fit in how I want them to fit in. And I'm going to be like, I need to do all these things. And I mean, shit, 5 years is like, we're there. And she was right. Like, it takes a long time to cultivate these things, but don't scare the 20-year-olds or the young people with it. Just try to get them to enjoy a process. I was like Iverson. I hated practice, but I just like to play. And I have played so long that you're right. You don't see I've been playing baseball since I was 8, but you saw me in my 20s and saw a certain skill level. But if you think about it, I have been playing for so many years, right? And got to that skill level. I don't think about those things anymore. So try not to scare the young people, just get them to enjoy the process, show them what that process looks like. And then for the rest of us, as we get more and more skilled and older, we start to enjoy the fruits of that labor.
I mean, it's like jujitsu, where the white belts, especially the day ones, you let them have fun, and then once they hit the next one, blue belts, you're like, okay, now we show you that there's work. We don't try to murder you, generally, but
I do. 100%.
I know you do. Smash all day, smash. But it's you get them to fall in love with it a bit, and then once they get more invested, then you can show them that there is a lot of work involved.
Absolutely. Shaun, thoughts?
Yeah, I think if I could change the way of the world, I'd change it this way. Whether it's an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 22-year-old, it doesn't much matter to me. I think that a lot of society views the world as a veneer. They only go half an inch deep. They consider the path in front of them as at a surface level. I think you just have to go just a touch below that veneer with curiosity. I think curiosity is the game changer. As a 20-year-old who is looking ahead into the future and thinking, what? 10 years of the grind? All right, change it up. It's 10 years of curiosity. The grind, the veneer of the grind seems eternal at 20. But if you can be curious, time just disappears. Nowadays, I mean today, I was walking down a street, again, my poor wife. Maybe my brain works differently than others. But I was walking down a busy street, and out of my peripheral, I saw an old guy making keys manually. And his little street stall was a gong show. I mean, it was a mess. It was littered. It was like I typed in my stories, Matrix, the key maker. Because that's what my mind saw, was a guy who was a master of his craft. I'd already seen it in a split second that he'd been in the game a long time. And I wanted to go over there and experience that. I was curious about him. I'll never see him again. There was no reason for me to go over there, but I was simply curious. And I stood and watched him for a minute. And I said, do you mind if I take a photo? And I took a photo for me, not for the internet, not for him, for me, because I was curious about the moment. I was curious about the man. I was curious about the craft. I could have spent all day talking to him if I thought I could have. And so curiosity will make time disappear. If you're 20 and you apply a certain curiosity to the world around you, before you know it, you'll be 60 with a body of knowledge that you won't even know how it got there. Don't worry about the time. Don't worry about the grind. Just be curious about life.
I like that a lot. Now we are a little bit over time here, so we're gonna have to wrap it up. I do want to say just right off the bat, both Tamara, Tanya, really appreciate the conversation. This has been awesome. We've hit so many good points here, and there's lots of great information that we can play on. Any final thoughts? Anything at all, Tamara? I'm gonna come to you first. Anything?
No, I can't wait to get my kids into jujitsu. You guys make it
Yes.
sound amazing. My older sister had started it some years ago. I think she's kind of dropped off, but it always seemed like something amazing, and just like that skill and that mental skill and that body coordination. So thanks for the inspiration.
This is what we're here for. At least I think we are. Tanya, any final thoughts at all?
Yeah, all this talk about inspiration makes me think of my days back in art school where I emulated a lot of artists that inspired me, and eventually seeing all of these things and comparing myself, it began feeling stifling. And I became frustrated and wasn't doing that well in school, despite doing drawing like so and so. And I was like, why isn't this working? And eventually the messaging from my teachers got through my thick skull, and I also became so frustrated. I'm like, F it, I'm going to just do me, and I'm just going to do what I want. I don't care about what the teachers mark it as. I'm going to do stuff that I think is rad, and in the way that I want to do it. And lo and behold, it began to work. And at first I was a little, I wouldn't say a little resistant to Shaun's concept of just doing yourself. But then I realized, no, those have been the only times where I do succeed in the sense of getting to the goal I want, and somehow being inspiring, is when I trust that my process in finding my voice in this craft, that it'll be okay, and it'll be just fine regardless of what people think about it. And also you have a much better experience in gaining those skills than if you're constantly worrying about what your coach thinks or what this audience thinks, because it doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be doing the most fun activity in the world, but if you're constantly worrying about external sources of approval and validation, and worrying about how you come across, it's not going to be enjoyable. So it really is about just effing around and finding out and just doing you. And so, yeah, once again, annoyingly, Shaun is kind of right.
He happens to happen every once in a while, right? Shaun, final thoughts?
Well, I'm glad you said that, Tanya, because it's not that we missed a beat here, but it is a great tie-in to the aspect of curiosity. If you're curious enough in life, eventually something will feel right or wrong. But if it feels right, have additional curiosity to pursue that. Why does it feel right? And so I think that's what it comes down to, is starting to build on not the external validation, but the internal understanding, the internal feeling of what feels right to you. Building off that, I think eventually most people will find their way. Not my way, not his way, not her way, their way, your way. And so if you're, again, curious enough in life, be open to feeling what is right for you. Engage in that with more curiosity. And before you know it, you'll be some scrub, unshaven, in front of a microphone, wondering why he's doing it, but kind of digging it in a weird way. And I suppose that's the way of life, man. If you're curious enough, it'll take you in some pretty interesting trajectories.
Yeah. Who would have thought that you would be podcasting from Malaysia just to make sure that we had daily hits on this? Is who would have thought that when we started? It's pretty amazing. I don't have a lot to add here other than the fact that inspiration is it's a big topic, and we're going to be talking about this all week, and we're going to hit different lanes of it and figure out a little bit more in depth as to what it is we're doing. And I think that's because, well, first off, I'm curious. I want to find out. I want to find out what other people do here. I want to learn more about the world and how people see it, how people live in it. And once I start learning about something, then I can build on it. And once I build on it, I grow. And y'all can do that with us every day here on the Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.